Hello, my name is Damián Chapa. I've been making films for over 35 years. I starred in films such as Under Siege with Steven Seagal, Street Fighter with Van Damme, and El Padrino with Faye Dunaway. I've also starred in films with Tommy Lee Jones, Paz a la Huerta, Maria Conchita Alonso, and many more stars in Hollywood. I've been very blessed to have such a wonderful career. I even had the chance to work with Chris Tucker, one of the most brilliant comedians of our time. I even won the New York International Film and Video Festival Best Drama and Best Film Award for Brando Unauthorized. I was the only person in the world who ever to direct a film and play Roman Polanski. I won Best Production in Indie Fest for this film. However, throughout my career, no other film has ever touched or brought so much emotion to me as Blood In, Blood Out, Sangre por Sangre. Blood In, Blood Out has become a cult status film. It has been released throughout the world. International countries such as Japan, it won the Tokyo Film Festival for the director Taylor Hackford. Many other countries are very, very well of its presence, such as Sweden and Germany and France, where it's called Prince de la Ville, which means Prince of the City. Many countries kept its name, Sangre por Sangre, or Blood In, Blood Out. Of course, in Latin America and, of course, Latino USA, it's become a real household name, and I've been very blessed to be a part of that. Many people know my character name as Miklo, or El Güero, or Milkweed. This film has lived on in many people's hearts and minds. Blood In, Blood Out changed my life. It really, as an actor, it started my career, but myself as a human being, Damian Chapa, it also led me on a journey to discover my Chicano culture. I've done so many movies and been on so many sets and been all over the world, but no film has been like the experience that happened over 20 years ago. To me as a filmmaker, as an actor, it's been a great experience because that film was the foundation of my very existence as an actor. I was born in Ohio and later on moved to New York City. However, I experienced many different people, many different cultures. However, my father was Chicano and he was from Robstown, Texas. And when I was a little boy, my father, he sent me down to see my abuela. And mi abuela was named Juanita Chapa, one of the greatest figures in my life. I had spent time in Ohio and then New York, but when I finally went down to Robstown, Robe, or the Robstown cotton pickers, as people know it down there, I began to experience something that really changed me as a person. I began to understand more about my Chicano roots, and I held on to my wonderful, beautiful, Indian-faced grandmother, and I looked up at her and I wondered, what was this mystery? What was she about? How was I a part of this? My Spanish was not really that good when I went down to see my grandmother to experience my Chicano culture for the first time as a youth. I did have some experience with my uncles, all who spoke Spanish, but I mainly wasn't around them as a young boy, but when I was around them, I started to feel and see the difference between my parents. My mother being white and my father being Chicano, there were many differences in the culture. And I began to understand a little bit of Spanish, so by the time I went to Robstown, Robe, I began to open up myself to this beautiful language and this beautiful culture. My grandmother only spoke Spanish to me, and it was a journey and an interesting way of learning Spanish because I was sort of forced into it because I didn't know much. Week after week I began to hablar con mi abuela and to learn things about my culture. She would take me down the street of Main Street in Robstown and show me all the different stores that had been there for decades and decades. One of the stores my grandfather owned, his name was SxS Chapa. Both my grandparents were immigrants from Mexico. My grandmother happened to be American Indian and adopted by a wonderful Mexican couple who brought her up as a Mexican American. Of course, the indigenous are mixed with the Spanish, which is what makes Mexican. I was very proud of this fact that my grandmother was a very high percentage of American Indian. Actually, the tribe was Karen Cowan. So many Mexicans mixed with Karen Cowans and many Spanish mixed with Indians and indigenous tribes and created this multicultural aspect of the Mexican-American experience. I was blessed to have many sides biculturally, and in this experience, learning more about myself as a Chicano, it opened me up for something that later on in my life I would never understand how perfect the synchronicity would be that I would play MIKLO VELKA. I noticed something when I was in the Mexican-American culture. I noticed a warmth and a love that I hadn't experienced as a child with my other cousins. My cousins on the other side would spout off racial comments like taco boy or wetback or what have you. These things hurt me as a child. So basically what happened was I went in to read for the Academy Award director, Taylor Hackford. I was very nervous. It was the biggest part I'd ever read for. It was the ultimate film, $35 million Disney film, one of the lead roles, and a role that I felt that I deserved because I grew up like this. I knew that I was right for the part, but I did not have the experience that many of the other actors had that were up for the part. And there were many famous actors up for the part, for Miklos, and many other much more experienced people than me. So when I went in, Taylor loosened me up a lot. He talked a lot about my experience as a young Chicano growing up. I told him about my grandmother. I told him about my grandfather. I told him about the immigrants from Mexico, my wonderful tias and tios who were a part of this culture, and my father who tried to send me to my grandmother's to make me understand who and what I was. I told him about these experiences and he seemed very enamored with this. I think for him it would probably, looking back, be a great experience to see somebody who actually had the same elements as Miklo. Not only superficial things like the light hair at the time and blue eyes and the lighter complexion, but growing up in this fight of trying to figure out where you fit in. And I experienced many of those things and I expressed that to the director. So he made me feel very warm and welcome and tried to get the best out of me, which really helped. So I read for him and I put everything into it, but I was so nervous. I think I remember jittering and my hands were shaking throughout the reading. So I don't know if I did such a great reading, but there were times and moments where it was real and I felt it. And I think he saw that. So he looked at me and he said, listen, we don't have a lot of time. At that point, they were just about ready to cast the part. And there were 3 or 4 people they had in mind already for Miklo. So he looked at me and said, I'm going to screen test you with those other people. I'm not saying you have the part, but I'm going to screen test you. I thanked them very much. I left the office. I went home. I studied the lines over and over and over and over again. There were about 4 scenes, one of which was the scene inside the prison where I talked to Montana. And I tell him, I'm white on the outside, but I'm brown on the inside to the bones. And that scene was one of the scenes that I read and used as the screen test. So I went in and I looked around at the studio. It was the first time I'd ever been in a studio to do a screen test. I was so nervous. And here I was seeing all these famous people that were up for my same role. And I just felt a bit insecure. And I didn't know if I could pull it off. But something deep within me said, you've got to try. You've got to try hard. And then something wonderful happened. During the screen test, I met Benjamin Bratt, who was playing Paco. They were already cast, him and Jesse Borrego. And what happened was, Jesse Borrego came up to me and told me some things about Texas and made me relax. And I looked at Jesse and I saw something so familiar in Jesse. I saw a Tex-Mex and somebody that was so warm and loving and inviting and a real poet. I mean, Jesse had been a very famous guy when I was growing up already. I mean, I knew Jesse right away from fame. It was amazing that he came up to me and was so warm and inviting and told me, relax, take it easy, it's going to be all right. You know, he really gave me something that really, if it wasn't for Jesse, I don't think I would have got through the screen test. And I think from then on, throughout the performance, Jesse and I bonded in that way. The next thing that happened was very interesting. I got through the screen test. I went home. A big load came off my shoulders that I finished the original screenplay. the original screen test, the original competition. I went home and 3-4 days passed by and I didn't hear anything from anybody. And I began to get a little depressed because I knew and I felt the emotions that day in the prison, in the screen test prison. I knew that it was there. I knew that MIKLO had arrived, but I didn't hear anything from the director. About 5 days later, I got a call. It was from Taylor Hackford. He said, I have to tell you something, Damian, we have a big problem. And I thought to myself, well, no, there goes that part. He said, no, wait, I want to tell you, you did a great job. You did a great screen test. But 85% of the footage from the screen test has been mistakenly destroyed. A part of me was destroyed at that moment because I had put all this effort, all these years, all these emotions, everything into the screen test to play MIKLO in Blood In, Blood Out. And here was the director calling me to tell me that my screen test was destroyed. I couldn't do anything but ask him, what are we going to do about it? And he told me, he said, we need to screen test again. So out of all the other actors, I was the only one who had to screen test again because for some reason my footage was destroyed. Maybe it was an accident. Could well have been. I went back in. I did my role. I was very nervous. My brother had passed nearly after that and was dying of cancer. And I was really going through a lot back then. And my brother Rico, whom I love and dedicate all this to, well, it was a very difficult time because I got to the tough time of the first competition, but my brother was failing. So when I went in, I was a bit disheveled. I didn't do as good on the second screen test as I did the first one for many reasons. But Taylor called me up and he said, hey, we'll get back to all the actors in a week and we'll let you know, good job. You did better on the first one, but he said, hey, we found a way to save the footage that was inside the prison. The greatest screen test I did was inside the prison. I was so relieved, so they were going to intercut the new screen test with the original footage inside the screen test for myself in Montana, where I asked him to be a part of La Onda. And that screen test was the most important for me because I remember feeling the emotions. A week later, I got a call. Taylor Hackford said, MIKLO, can you come meet me? And I said, MIKLO? He's calling me MIKLO. I said, of course. So he said, come meet me. He gave me an address to a very famous restaurant in Hollywood on Melrose. Now at the time I had not met Jimmy Baca, but I walked in and I saw a very, very intense, brilliant man named Jimmy Baca sitting there. And Jimmy was very, very similar to the role he played in Blood In, Blood Out. Very controlled, very emotional, very brilliant, and very, very understanding, a very intuitive man. I sat down in front of him. Jimmy began to question me about my childhood, question me about my Chicano roots, question me about the experience I had with certain members of my family that had been in organized crime, and so on and so on.